My name is James Witbrook. I am a graduate student at Northwestern Health Sciences University, pursuing a Master of Science in Integrative Care with a focus on trauma. My research focuses on adult developmental milestones, particularly how trauma, PTSD, and chronic stress impact career and vocational performance. This evolves from my earlier work at Brandeis University on psychosocial borderlands of identity. Through my current program, I aim to understand cognitive, neural, and physiological underpinnings of identity development. I'm particularly focused on processes like self-belief, hope, and motivation in middle adulthood. This presentation features a case study completed as part of the coursework for Biology of Mind under the instruction of Dr. Sasha Hope in February of 2025. This case study examines the journey of a woman in her early 50s, a pastor who we'll call Rosa, whose story illuminates the intricate relationship between accumulated stress and neural renewal. As a religious leader and caregiver, Rosa has served her congregation while navigating significant personal and professional challenges that began in her late 20s and extended through the first 2 decades of ministry. Rosa's story is not primarily a story of trauma, though trauma is undeniably present. Rather, it's a story of how crisis and identity interweave. And what I'd like to highlight is how Rosa intuitively developed an approach to stress mitigation that aligns with current neuroscientific understanding. The solitary aspect of inner identity development is particularly notable in Rosa's case. Although Rosa has a wonderfully supportive marriage, the work of identity development is necessarily an internal quest. And when external circumstances interrupt developmental milestones, the persistence to remain internally focused is challenged. From my interviews with Rosa, it's clear that her mind-body connectivity practices were both the source of her stress maintenance and recovery, as well as her pathway to identity development. Rosa's journey reveals how intuitive mind-body practices like centering prayer and nature immersion align with neuroscientific principles of stress recovery, enabling identity development despite chronic trauma. Her experience demonstrates that internal coherence can be achieved through contemplative practices, even amid external chaos that would typically trigger psychological entropy. Through consistent mind-body practices over time, Rosa's case models the mutual co-emergence of self-acceptance and healthy adult identity. The current moment represents an optimal window for a structured sabbatical, as Rosa has only recently acknowledged a newfound sense of psychological safety, which I believe results from an integration of meaning, purpose, and internal coherence. This case study emphasizes that Rosa's awe-inducing contemplative practices were instrumental in unifying these elements, and a sabbatical now will consolidate her recent milestone of self-acceptance while building long-term resilience. This recommendation is not merely supportive, but it's also scientifically indicated based on neural recovery patterns. Rosa's journey has been marked by significant life events creating allostatic load, the cumulative wear from repeated stress cycles. As an adult child of parents impacted by addiction, she faced acute challenges throughout adolescence. In adulthood, further acute stressors included her first child's near-fatal medical crisis, sudden loss of her sister-in-law, her partner's job loss, and her third child's brain tumor diagnosis, the last three of those events all occurring within a 72-hour rapid succession weekend. Throughout these challenges, she maintained pastoral duties while developing what she calls forest pastor identity. Her path interweaves personal crisis, family trauma, and transformation. When her firstborn required emergency surgery at 7 days old, Rosa experienced her first profound adulthood crisis, which was followed in what she describes as immediate postpartum depression. Just as Rosa began imagining how her identity could function within ministry, multiple crises struck simultaneously. Throughout these years, scarcity defined Rosa's experience. Financial scarcity, time scarcity with her medically fragile children, dying parents, and scarcity regarding her ordination status, which was threatened due to the time that she was spending with her caregiving duties. Rosa's journey exemplifies the rupture and repair process occurring primarily within herself. The external crises she faced, such as her children's medical emergencies, family bereavements, and professional challenges, constitute significant ruptures that disrupted her sense of self and internal stability. as well as external stability. In response, Rosa engaged in internal repair mechanisms, notably through mind-body practices, like her forest pasture activities and her centering prayer. These practices facilitated her stress recovery and identity development. Research supports the efficacy of mind-body intervention in addressing stress and fostering identity development. For instance, studies on mind-body bridging demonstrate that such practices enhance self-confidence and self-awareness, contributing to professional identity formation. Additionally, mindfulness-based stress reduction has been shown to promote well-being and reduce psychological distress. In Rosa's case, the rupture was instigated by external events, but the repair, and this is what I find really cool about this case, is that the repair transpired internally through her commitment to these restorative practices. This aligns with the understanding that while external circumstances can cause significant disruptions, the healing and reconstruction of identity often necessitates internal processes. Okay, to establish a foundation for understanding the ingenuity of Rosa's approach to managing stress while persistently developing her sense of vocational identity, I want to review particular areas specifically impacted by chronic stress and uncertainty. So as a warning, the next couple of slides are going to be full of a bunch of sciencey stuff. You can fast forward or you can stick with it. But the next couple of slides, we're going to review three particular regions. The first is the default mode network, which shows nuanced activity patterns during stress, the anterior cingulate cortex, often called the ACC, as well as the insula, which play crucial roles in emotional regulation, and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and the orbitofrontal cortex, DLPFC and OFC, which can perpetuate stress responses through excessive logical processing. Now would be the time to fast forward if you don't want to know about the sciencey components. So the default mode network, DMN, is a network of interconnected brain regions that is active when the mind is at rest, engaged in self-referential thinking, daydreaming, or reflecting on the past or the future. Importantly, the DMN is not monolithic, but contains distinct subcomponents with different functions, which is to say, the DMN is dynamic, it's flexible, it's composed of multiple interacting subsystems. Now, while the DMN is crucial for identity formation, meaning making, and creativity, certain patterns of activation, especially under chronic stress, can lead to rumination, worry, and heightened emotional reactivity. At this point, I want to pause and highlight a particular scholar whose ongoing scholarship on the DMN most heavily informs my understanding of its processes, and that is Scott Barry Kaufman, who goes to great lengths to deliver his research at free or no cost to the general public through his blog, podcast, and other resources, which you can find at scottbarrykaufman.com. So, going back to our case here, given Rosa's prolonged exposure to crises and uncertainty, specific components of her DMN likely became overactive, particularly those associated with self-critical thoughts and what Singer termed guilty dysphoric daydreaming. This type of use of the DMN, this type of activation of the DMN, can create a loop of persistent stress, making it harder to experience moments of peace. It's important to note that the problem isn't daydreaming itself, but rather it's the nature of mind wandering and a person's relationship to it. So what I see in Rosa's story is that to counterbalance this overactivity, Rosa's engagement in centering prayer and forest-based spiritual practices likely helped reconfigure DMN activity rather than simply quieting it. Research suggests that meditation doesn't just reduce DMN activity uniformly, but instead it alters the connectivity between the executive attention network and various DMN subcomponents, which decrease communication with self-critical aspects while potentially increasing access to broader emotional and creative resources. The anterior cingulate cortex, ACC, is involved in error detection, emotional self-regulation, and cognitive flexibility. When functioning optimally, it helps a person adapt to stressors and regulate emotions. However, chronic stress can weaken ACC function, leading to emotional rigidity and difficulty recovering from distress. The insula is responsible for interoception, which is awareness of bodily states, as well as empathy and processing emotions like pain and disgust. Stress can heighten insula activity, increasing emotional sensitivity and making negative emotions feel even more intense. So, given the emotional and physical toll of her caregiving responsibilities and vocational uncertainty, Rosa's ACC and insula were likely strained. Rosa's somatic and contemplative practices, such as being in nature and doing regular centering prayer, may have restored ACC and insula balance by grounding her in her body and helping her regulate emotional processes. Activities that emphasize interoception, such as breath work, movement, and meditation, are known to strengthen these areas, improving resilience. Dorsolateral Prefrontal Cortex, DLPFC, is involved in rational decision making, problem solving, and executive control. While it's crucial for leadership and complex thinking, excessive reliance on the DLPFC during stress actually can lead to overanalyzing, suppressing emotions, and resulting in cognitive exhaustion. The orbitofrontal cortex, OFC, helps in evaluating awards, rewards, consequences, and social interactions. Under stress, the OFC can become hyperactive in processing risk and uncertainty, leading to increased anxiety about future outcomes. As a pastor and a caregiver, Rosa had to intellectualize and problem solve crises continuously. So it seems to me that this could have caused excessive DLPFC and OFC engagement, making it difficult for her to downshift into relaxation and embodying presence. Awe-inducing experiences, centering prayer and time in nature, however, likely helped Rosa interrupt these overactive DLPFC and OFC cycles. Research suggests that awe and mindfulness shift activity away from excessive cognitive processing into states of connectedness and openness, reducing stress while fostering renewal. So there was a whole lot going on here that was creating a scarcity of lots of resources, financial resources, time resources, and the emotional resources of always being under the constant threat of, do I have enough time with my children? So for those reasons, I want to really zoom in on scarcity. Scarcity affects cognitive processing in 4 ways that help explain Rosa's experience. The first is top-down versus bottom-up processing. So what this means is that scarcity creates involuntary interruptions that bypass conscious control. It forces a shift from deliberate thinking to reactive decision-making. Rosa was constantly facing uncertainty about money, time, and vocational security, for example, and she had limited cognitive bandwidth for future-oriented, strategic decision-making. Another impact of scarcity is decision fatigue. Chronic scarcity requires a constant trade-off of decisions, which depletes mental resources. The cognitive exhaustion from repeatedly deciding between caregiving responsibilities, vocational demands, and financial obligations likely contributed to decision fatigue, making long-term planning and self-care way more difficult. The third is hyperbolic discounting. Stress-induced scarcity leads to prioritizing immediate relief over long-term benefits. This is why in studies of poverty, we often find cases where someone who's been experiencing poverty receives a uptick in money and spends immediately rather than saving. This is not because of a intellectual incapacity. This is likely a stress-induced issue related to hyperbolic discounting. For Rosa, the relentless demands likely increase the appeal of short-term survival strategies over future-oriented planning. A fourth impact of scarcity on the brain is planning fallacy. So the planning fallacy relates to the tendency to underestimate the future time requirements and overestimate available resources. This can be exacerbated by scarcity. So Rosa's struggle to balance caregiving, ordination requirements, and financial survivor likely meant that there were times she was miscalculating how much time and energy she actually had available, which could have led to overcommitments, which then caused more stress along the way. So I share all of that as the lead up to really underscore just how unique and ingenious the mind-body connection in Rosa actually was. Hearing all of the different ways that stress was necessarily impacting her, it's really interesting to me that she was still able, in the midst of all of this, to have developed a healthy sense of self-acceptance and find methods to establish internal coherence through her inner work. So now we're going to zoom in on two of those strategies a little bit further, centering prayer and awe experiences. So zooming in on centering prayer and its relationship with neural renewal. Centering prayer, a form of Christian contemplative practice, which is very similar to mindfulness in that you hold a particular term in your mind. Let's say it is peace. And every time you watch the mind and notice the mind is wandering and the mind is thinking about the emails or the to-do list, the word peace drops in and you return back to it and mindfully notice peace. And it's this centering back to the particular word, which is anything of your choosing. So centering prayer, Christian contemplative practice, it's been associated with activation in brain regions related to emotional regulation and social cognition. So studies examining the effects of centering prayer found increased activation in the amygdala, the right prefrontal cortex, during trustworthiness judgments, which suggests enhanced emotional processing and decision-making. Regular practice of centering prayer over even 7 weeks, that's 7 weeks, has been linked to reduced anxiety, stress, and depression, as well as improvements in mindfulness and overall well-being. The second of these to zoom in on is nature-based awe experience and its relationship with stress reduction. Experiences of awe, particularly those elicited by nature, have been shown to influence activity in the brain's default mode network in beneficial ways. Rather than simply reducing DMN activity, awe experiences may actually help shift activity away from self-critical rumination toward what Scott Barry Kaufman identifies as positive constructive daydreaming. This reconfiguration can lead to decreased stress and a heightened sense of connection to something greater than oneself. Awe-inspiring experiences engage processes such as shifts in neurophysiology, diminished self-focus, and increased prosocial behavior, along with greater social integration and enhanced sense of meaning, all contributing to improved mental and physical health. And again, I just want to repeat that studies found that even engaging in this on a weekly basis for 7 weeks could have these results. So this also aligns with Kaufman's 2016 observation that the optimal state for both well-being and creativity involves mindfulness awareness of spontaneous thoughts rather than their elimination, which is to say, he is not a proponent of saying that it is all about just simply removing thoughts from the brain. It is the focus on bringing mindful awareness of spontaneous thought, which is what you often hear in Buddhist traditions or centering prayer traditions of watching the thought, seeing the thought before creating a story or judgment about it, mindfully noticing thought is here, worry is here, centering back to whatever that anchor is, whether it's the feeling of the air coming through your nose as you breathe in, or it's that centering prayer, peace, or what have you that you were using. So for integrating centering prayer and nature-based awe experiences into her routine, it's possible that Rosa facilitated neural changes that promote emotional balance, reduce stress, and a strengthened sense of vocational identity. In one of our interviews, Rosa told me, centering prayer is a resting space that just exists in the rhythms of my life. And I loved when she shared that with me because it came in the course of a conversation where I was really attuned to the series of traumatic events. And I was a little alarmed at how unshaken she was. And I was really curious about that. And that's when she explained and introduced, oh, well, it was centering prayer that I found peace even within these rhythms. So without even a scientific understanding of the cortical activation of rest, Rosa's body-mind connective wisdom brought her back to this place of respite time and again. So now coming full circle back to the thesis here, what I feel is happening in Rosa's experience is that an internal process of meaning making occurred in which centering prayer functioned as a stabilizing force that brought coherence to her life. First internal, even amidst the external incoherence. So while Rosa had purpose, which is to say she had a clear direction for her life, whether that was originally ordination and then it was motherhood, and she also had mattering, which is a sense of significance that she derived from motherhood, ministry, nature, her relationship with local library systems and community. So she had purpose and she had mattering. But when Scott Barry Kaufman teaches about the foundations for psychological safety, he said there are three things that we really need for that: purpose, mattering, and coherence. So she had purpose, she had mattering, but it seems to me that it was only through the internal work of centering prayer that coherence emerged internally for Rosa. Psychological coherence, the ability to integrate life experience into a stable sense of self, plays a critical role in identity development, particularly in the aftermath of prolonged stress. So as Kaufman notes in his 2020 release of Transcend, coherence, purpose, and mattering are three fundamental elements of meaning in life, and disruptions in any of these domains can contribute to stress and instability. Other scholars, Moose and Swindle, demonstrated that ongoing stress erodes coherence, leading to chronic psychological and physiological consequences, which aligns with Porges' polyvagal theory, which underscores how automatic balance is necessary for healing from trauma. Rosa's internal coherence, built through centering prayer, created the conditions for her recent milestone of self-acceptance. This is significant because, as Dweck in 2017 suggests in her Unified Theory of Motivation, Personality, and Development, self-coherence arises when a person experiences alignment across fundamental psychological needs, which Dweck identifies as trust, control, self-esteem and status, and predictability. If you are at all familiar with the Enneagram, you will most certainly notice the overlap with Enneagram centers and types in that statement. Trust, control, self-esteem, status, and predictability. So going back to Rosa, Rosa's centering prayer practice helped her regulate her nervous system, reinforcing a sense of internal predictability and safety, which in turn allowed self-acceptance to emerge. Rosa's own words illustrate this transformation. She says, "I didn't see myself as a pastor or as having the skills of a pastor. That was my defining story until 2024. The idea of calling has just truly settled in me last summer," referring to the summer of 2024. And again, we're doing this recording in February of 2025. This sabbatical is not a luxury. It's a scientific and psychological necessity. While Rosa has achieved an important milestone in self-acceptance, her nervous system still carries the long-term wear and tear of chronic stress. Lisa Feldman Barrett's concept of the brain-body budget reinforces that individuals with prolonged exposure to uncertainty need extended recovery periods to replenish physiological and psychological reserves. Rosa's case also aligns with findings from burnout research, which highlight that coherence and control, both central to Rosa's transformation, are also protective factors against burnout. And this is why the sabbatical recommendation is more than just an opportunity for 3 more months of rest. It's an essential intervention that I feel is opportune at this time in her life and will reinforce the stabilization process that has only recently emerged for Rosa. Rosa says, "What makes my heart sing is a family system that is dynamic and open and trusting." By engaging in prolonged, unstructured time with her family in environments that evoke awe, Rosa is reinforcing the very neural pathways that have contributed to her healing, while also introducing this healing form of life reinvention to her family and her 3 recently identified as adult children, who are almost entirely launched, I hear. The combination of deep rest and awe-based experiences will provide a buffer against future stressors, both for her and for her family, ensuring her newfound sense of self-acceptance remains sustainable. So here's the structured recovery plan that I recommend for Rosa. And I should also say I'm using this case study as part of background research to submit a grant with a team of other grant writers on her behalf to the Lilly Endowment in hopes that we will receive robust funding to be able to send Rosa and her family on this wonderful adventure. So here's the plan. Rosa's sabbatical plan will be structured around evidence-based approaches to stress recovery and neural integration. This approach bridges her recent transformation to sustainable long-term stability. This case demonstrates how multiple evidence-based approaches can support renewal at both neural and experiential levels. Rosa's intuitive movement towards nature-based healing, combined with structured contemplative practices and systematic changes to address scarcity mindset, offers a comprehensive path forward that addresses both the accumulated impact of stress and potential for deep renewal. The science of deep rest as a requirement for growth highlights the interplay between meaning-making, nervous system regulation, and identity development. By recognizing the role of centering prayer in fostering internal coherence, we see how self-acceptance emerged as the neural outcome of sustained inner work. And I will leave you with this segment from modern-day poet David Whyte. This is out of his 2025 book of essays called Consolations 2. This is from the chapter titled Stopping. We learn the art and practice of stopping so that we can join a deeper, onward-moving, unstoppable tide, one we have always intuited to lie beneath everything that seems immovable in our lives. The radical act of stopping things is actually the radical act of moving on in a better way, always to begin with, invisibly always to begin with, toward the unknown, and almost always, slightly to our grief, bringing our previous forms of happiness to a halt in order to move on toward a greater future happiness, always living, always waiting, just beyond our present understanding. If you'd like to get a list of these references, feel free to reach out. Also, feel free to reach out if you'd like to continue any sort of scholarly dialogue around this, or if you feel that my understanding of the research is off base, I'd love to learn from you. You can see my email address on the screen. Thank you.